We are live. Good morning. Good morning. It is October 31st, 2022. And if you just bear with me a second, I will get this thing live on Twitter. Doo-doo-doo-doo. Okay. Oh boy, it is Halloween. Things are looking pretty scary out there. Oh, brother. Well, while we're waiting for people to come on, I'll talk about some things. I had a tweet earlier this week where I was talking about the nature of trying to be able to look at your internal monologue. We talk a lot about external triggers, right? So it can be things in your environment, it could be emotions that you're feeling, it could be just being in locations, hearing things, smelling things that can act as triggers. But some of the biggest triggers actually happen inside of your mind, between your ears. The things that we tell ourselves can be the very trigger which causes the craving. And one of the things that I've really been um, talking to some of my sponsees about and talking to other people as well is that part of mindfulness is not just being mindful of the things that are happening on the outside, but also being mindful of the things that are happening on the inside. One of the problems that I see with having really long term porn exposure is that it can actually change your internal monologue. Um, and I might have to be blunt here about it, but the language of pornography, whether it's watching videos or looking at pictures, they tend to like have a conversation that's happening, and that might be a highly sexualized conversation, but the actual language of what entails that sexualization, um, you know, it can be just any sexual act, right? But the really detailed, like dirty language that is used inside of that expression, you're consuming that as a third party, right? You're consuming that as a third party, and you take on that language of sexual expression, things that you probably wouldn't have said before until you gained the knowledge of what that was, right? So it could be something as explicit as what you're doing with a body part or whatever, but whatever that thing is, you internalize it, right? So it's not just the fact that you looked at it, or you heard it, or you witnessed it. It's the fact that now that you've taken that in, it becomes part of your own language, and you start using it. Now, you might not be walking down the street and saying those things. I don't know. Maybe you are. I don't know. But oftentimes, what happens is that we still act normally, on our external surface, but inside our internal monologue is using that new dialogue of sexual expression. And you think about the way that dynamic would normally work, right? Because you're looking for those visual cues as you're hunting, seeking behavior for pornography use. But it might be that what you're looking at is no longer pornographic. It might be that you're just walking down the street and you see a beautiful woman, and for you heterosexual men, I guess the majority of my audience. Um, but think about that. You see somebody walking down the street who you find attractive, right? Um, are you thinking? what I would say is that pornographic expression, right? The really dirty language. Um, and my guess is that a majority of you probably are in some way saying, "Oh yeah, blah 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 blah," and you'd really get into that dirty talk, and you're not saying it out loud. You're just saying it inside of your mind. And some may say that's like, well, yeah, I'm a heterosexual man and I'm looking at an attractive woman. Wouldn't I? That's not the point, right? It's not the point. It's not that you're attracted to the other person. It's the fact that you're using that sexual expression that wasn't yours to begin with. Like you learned it from the outside world, you took it in and you made it your own. And part of the reason why you're using that language of sexual expression is because it helps enhance your your sexual desire, right? So it's not that you're using it for a practical reason, right? You take on that language because it was used in a way and format in which really intense sexual expression was happening, right? And you want to like seize that sexual expression for yourself, and you want it to be intense. Like you want that to be intense. um so that's the problem, right? Because the second you start thinking that way, what do you think's going to happen next? Like your brain is wanting to have the excuse to kind of like lean into how intense that can actually be, and it wants that intensity because it knows that if we keep going down this path it's going to be rewarded. So the mindfulness comes in because had you not been exposed to that sort of expression, the intense, jarring language of pornography, you probably wouldn't have been engaging in the first place. Like your thought may have started and ended with, "Oh wow, she's got a nice butt," and that would have been it. But because now you're going down a complete rabbit hole of pornographic expression inside of your mind, you don't want to stop. You want to make that sensation a little bit more intense, right? Um, and so I'm just giving you one example, and there could be multiple ways that this could happen, right? But what it does is it acts to make the intensity of what you're seeing and feeling even more intense, right? And so therefore, when you're experiencing that intensity, all of a sudden the cravings start kicking in. So rather than put yourself in a situation where you're constantly having to fight cravings, because your mind is geared to, oh, what I would do to her, blah, blah, blah. You have to, the second that happens, recognize the fact that you just said that inside of your mind, right? Oh, wow, I just said that, and oftentimes you were probably just letting that shit go because you were just like, oh, okay, this is an attractive woman. This is what I should be saying. But is it? Right? That's where I've harped for a while now that whether we like to think about it or not, the pornography that's out, and it's been out for a while now, is a type of learning. It's a school that you wanted to sign up for, right? You go through a learning process, and it's not just about satiating your desires. You're learning ways in which to consume, ways in which that sexual expression happens. And whether you take that on consciously or not, you're internalizing like all the messages that are being sent to you, including the types of things that um, you want the other person, the actor in this sexual play, to talk and say and think, and the ways that, and they also program you into the ways that you should be thinking, right? And you see this played out. It's a script that happens all the time in modern pornography. You don't think that's sticking with you in some way? Of course it is. It's teaching you, whether you wanted that education or not, it's teaching you how to think when it comes to sexuality. I could go on a while about this, but there really is lessons to be learned if you really sit down and think critically about the messages of pornography and the ways in which that we consume it, right? It acts as a coach into sexual expression. And part of the thing that I'm telling you is that you have to be critical of the training it's given you if you've been a long time consumer, because chances are the ways you're thinking and the way which ties into the ways you act and perform, right? All these things are interlaced. But the ways that you're thinking have been coached and trained to you by a second entity, right? By a foreign entity that have put these thoughts inside of your mind. And now your own sexual expression is tied to those scripts that other people created. So, mindfulness. The way mindfulness works in this situation is that you have to catch it at the moment that it happens. And earlier in the week, I posted a picture of a snowball going down a hill. It's a basic diagram, but the concept is exactly that. The snowball starts small at the top of the hill. And if you let that sucker keep rolling down the hill, well, by the time it gets to the bottom, it's going to be massive. So if you think about it from the how cravings and our triggers are tied together, that little thing at the top of the hill, which you think maybe isn't such a big deal because it's so tiny, right? So maybe that's the thought inside of your mind that represents like dirty talk, the dirty sexual expression. You let that sucker keep going, right? And you don't catch it right there. It's going to keep traveling down before it becomes a big hill and it becomes a big snowball. And at the bottom of that hill, what that represents is now you've let that thought carry on, get you triggered, and now you've got a craving to deal with. And now that craving is big, right? And so what's going to happen next? You're probably going to act out. So yeah, in my personal opinion, you've really got to be mindful of all of your inner monologue. And that's enough about that. So um don't have anybody on chat yet. We're gonna do a half hour today. I'll run it over to 9:30 and we'll take a step. What else do we have to talk about? And again, for anybody who's might be listening in right now, the purpose of this, of me doing the chat, is I'll talk about news and whatever's on my mind. But if somebody comes on the chat and they just want to talk about their uh, pornography use or talk about some of the struggles they're going through or even just ask basic questions, that's what this channel's all about. I leave it open every single Monday. Occasionally we'll get people just jumping on and they want to ask a question, and I'll answer those questions. So again, feel free, if you have anything you want to say, go ahead and you know jump down into the chat and ask your question. And if you want to fire up your camera and you want to just have a face to face, go for it. Turn it on. I'll send you the link. Just drop me a note down in the chat. Oh, I was talking about how I was talking on Twitter about sometimes there's a lot of criticism that people go through because of what they get caught looking at. It doesn't matter what you've been looking at in your pornography. So, I've seen it all. I've seen guys that were like really heavy into BDSM. I've seen guys in just about every single fetish you could possibly imagine. Um, and so what happens, right, is that I've met a few guys that got affected or got into their fetish at a very young age, right? Like adolescent young. And then there was other men that started off as regular pornography consumers, and they just through sheer you know numbers, through sheer large numbers, they started leaning into certain facets of pornography that some might consider distasteful. Um, Look, I'm not going to judge anyone. I don't care what you were into, and the reason why I say that is, you know, other people, the outside world that doesn't that isn't really leaning hard into pornography, or maybe some people that are in a lot of denial that can't see it, they're quick to make judgments about "Man, you're fucking sicko, dude." And I was probably one of those people years back. I was probably one of those people. But what you get to see when you're inside of, like, a lot of recovery rooms is that people are just people, man. There's a lot of good people that get up, they get wrapped up in some crazy shit, and it's just where they ended up. And yes, they made perhaps some poor decisions in their pornography consumptions, but they're there because it's not it's not who they are in real life. If you see them out in public, they're probably good citizens. They're doing the best they can, and they had this addiction that they were trying to hide from everybody else, right? Because it's kind of gross to talk about your sex life. Um, uh, it shouldn't be gross to talk about your sex life, but that's the way the public perceives it. And so they're doing the realistic thing. They're keeping it under wraps, and things start spiraling out of control, and they end up where they're at. And God help them if whatever kink or fetish they're into gets to exposed to the public, because then they're at the mercy of the judgments of society. Um, and I'm telling you, this is a safe space for you, because all the people that I've come across that have gotten into some really unhealthy behaviors and practices, and some may consider morally obtuse. Listen, if you still have if you recognize that what you're doing is harming yourself, and you don't understand how you got there in the first place, I think that the human brain is like a sponge. It'll absorb anything that gets put in there. But you know what? You can also kind of give it a little bit of a squeeze and start to retreat. Get some of that stuff out of there and start to take in some new things again. And there is absolutely no person that's out there that I've been exposed to in my own meetings and recovery rooms that wasn't worth the effort, right? Every single person can make a turnaround in their life if they choose to put the effort into it. And by simple virtue of you trying to make a change in your life, you're absolutely worth it. You are absolutely worth every single bit of effort you put into this. No question about it. No question about it. Just checking my phone, and let's take a look over here at the chat. I don't see anybody in yet. Yeah, I'm gonna run to 9:30 today, guys. I got a busy day ahead of me. So, oh, happy Halloween to all of you folks out there. I should have gotten some Halloween stuff around here. Should have thought that one out. Oh, what did I have? I thought I had an article I wanted to talk about. Let's see what that was. Here, this is yet another. This is a more recent article, and this was a study actually. It was the psychological morbidities associated with this sex abuses of smartphones among adolescents and young adults. Um, so I think this study, I read a good portion of this study, and I don't think that there's anything that you could really put good solid wall against. Like, all these things that we talk about kind of hold hands in some way, or kind of have hands, and you know that are tied together, and things are loosely associated with one another. So for example, this device that I'm holding in my hand right now, um, you know how difficult is it to continually use this device and be struggling with a porn addiction, right? So like, if you're a huge consumer of whatever is on your phone right now, and you also have a porn addiction, right? And a lot of your porn consumption is happening through a mobile device of some sort, right? There's a comorbidity there, right? And these two things are holding hands. One of the things I tell people early in recovery, at least for the first 90 days, is, man, be a digital minimalist. You have to really be able to start breaking the associations in your mind between pornography use and the ways in which you would interact with pornography. And so one of the things you can really do early on in recovery is, man, I take my phone and I put it in another room. I literally put it in another room and I don't look at it for the rest of the day. Now there's times when I'm working, I have to be like near my phone. I have to be using it. And obviously now, like now that I'm like well within my recovery, I'll drop on, throw my inspirational tweets and other information that I found out there once in a while. But it's part of my 12th step that I'll use that phone. But when I'm not doing that, that phone is as far away as I possibly can make it. So, like, I'll keep the ringer on. If somebody's trying to call me, I hear it from the next room. I'll go get it. Right. I get in the practice of trying not to be near the phone for a better part of the day. And if you start making that a routine, it gets easy. um, and you can certainly manage it. Now, if you have to use it for work, then you have to start getting into more tighter routines, like start making tiny, like micro rules for yourself. It's like, okay, I'm only going to use this for calls, and at bare minimum, I'll give myself like 60 seconds of time to either check the sports score or whatever, right? So you make hard rules and you stick to them. I don't believe in blockers, and I've said in the past that I think pornography blockers are the dumbest things out there, because what they're doing is they're passing the buck to somebody else to monitor you, where you should be monitoring yourself. And I will never back down from that assertion. Like, you really need to exercise your muscles and exercise restraint. That's what this thing's all about. Don't pass the buck to somebody else. You do you. Like, you set the rules and boundaries. Now, if you want to have like an external person to like monitor you and your decisions, that's a different story. Like, if you decide to get a recovery buddy and you and him get together and it's like, yes, I went on my phone 6 times yesterday and here's what I did with it. That's actually pretty cool. And you might be saying, so what's the difference between that and using the app? You're doing the talking, you're doing the initiation, you're doing all the restraint, you're doing the work. That's the difference. Anyway, with that study, the thing that I was originally talking about, it was talking about, all the bad shit that happens basically from um, a young kid that's holding his phone all the time. And the basically you start leaning on the technology all the time because it's now in your face. And you start to gain this dependency upon the digital device, which in and of itself is a problem. I mean, there's lots of programs out there just trying to deprogram people from using electronic devices, for God's sakes. So just being cognizant of the fact that this is a real problem, man. Like, this, there's an entire generation of kids that are growing up right now that have known nothing but portable devices and can't get their freaking faces out of it. And I'm not trying to be like an old guy saying, "You kids back in my day." The idea is just being cognizant of the fact that, you know what, there's a lot of cool things that might come from the smartphone that I'm holding out right now, but the outside world, it's a beautiful fall day right now here. The outside world is also important, and you need to be involved in that. And so, limiting the exposure that you have to a device, no matter what your age, is a good thing. But when it's happening at somebody who's really young and they're constantly getting in this feedback loop of, oh, I'm being rewarded by this thing that I'm looking at, and nonstop, it's in their face all the time. When they try doing that exercise of putting this damn thing in another room and not touching it, they'll be like, yeah, they can't handle it. It's difficult. Just the sheer act of being separated from their electronic device pisses them off. And that's what type of what type of person is that building? What type of addict is that building? So now, if that person does get into a pornography loop, and you think it's going to be easy to break away from an electronic device? Hell no. But if they break away from that electronic device, it's probably going to be the best thing that could ever happen to them. Seriously. And I'm cognizant. I'm using YouTube right now as a tool to reach out to people. I'm totally cognizant of that. It is what it is. Got to use the tools that I have to be able to reach out and help other people. And I'll use the electronic ones. So I'll leverage your addiction against you to help you fight your own addiction. Oh, brother. Well, we don't have anybody on yet. This might I figured as much as on a holiday. Um, Time check, we got about 9 minutes. Check Twitter here and see if I've gotten anything. Do, 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 do. Yeah, some of these articles, man. Mm. This is from Fight the New Drug. According to a study that tracked couples over a 6 year period, porn consumption was the second strongest indicator that a marriage would suffer. In fact, the relationships that were harmed the most were those of individuals who viewed pornography the most. And that was from 2017, and I haven't gone. I like to actually go out and read some of these studies to, sometimes these studies are um, a little loosey goosey on their scientific method, and I like to go out and at least make sure that it was pretty rigid. In other words, I want to see I want to see that you had over 1,000 people who were randomly selected, and and if I don't see at least that, then the study, honestly, if we're being honest about it, if you're using small numbers, it's really difficult for me to be able to, from a statistical standpoint, for me to be able to take it seriously. And even if it does like have over 1,000 people, like then still you have to look at the mechanics of like how the study was done. So, okay, did you at least get a statistically relevant population? Okay, you got the statistically relevant population. Check. Um, did you get um, a study that didn't have the possible contamination of bias, right? You got to eliminate bias as much as you possibly can. And then if they didn't, if it jumps out at you just from reading the study itself, then it's going to be hard to take the study seriously. Um, and so, with this, I can just read at matter of factly about what Fight the New Drug posted here and say, oh, okay, I guess that can be, but I really want to see the details of it before I really uh, take that on or start passing that over as potentially adding to a broader thesis. Um, but one of the things I gotta say is like with marriages, I talk about this for a second. The reason why just reading that I have a little bit of trouble with it. Um, when you come into a marriage, right? You're taking on another individual, and that person has a moral and ethical persona. Um, they have the perceptions of what is good and what is bad, and a lot of troubles I think that happen in marriages. And y'all, if you haven't been married yet, it's really good. It's really good to maybe take on some marriage counseling. And I'm not talking about like there's troubles. I'm talking about it's like a premarital event where you go in and you talk about all the difficult shit that might happen. It's like, what's your perception of having children? You know, what is your moral ethical stand on this that I feel very passionate about, right? I think oftentimes, like, a lot of people just get hitched and, they're all in it for, hey, the dating and the fun things. But man, long-term relationships are some shit, man. You're going to be tested constantly on what you say, what you do, and what you think. And the things that you want to do one day, your partner might say, no, this is more important. You need to be working on this. How are you going to react? Right? How are you going to react to all the stresses that are in your life? I just had this conversation with somebody else the other day. There's a lot to it. There really is a lot to it, and it's going to test you, right? Are you going to wig out because you didn't get your way? You have to be able to. find within yourself, like, what are my limitations? What are their limitations? And understand what your limitations are. And 9 times out of 10, if you have a just a basic understanding of what those limitations are, you'll keep your fights down to a minimum. Like, there won't there the if it's all worked out ahead of time, there shouldn't be much fighting at all, because you while you may not always be on the same page with your partner, you'll at least understand their frame of mind and their reference and why they're thinking the things they're thinking. Um, and unfortunately, that does not happen in our society a lot. So getting back to this point about, you know, the individuals who had viewed porn and their partners, like, waking out about it. Well, that's because your partner perhaps had a perception about what the nature of pornography means to either them or to, their class. We're talking about women. It's like, I your spouse might say, "Hey, you know what? Yeah, I think that pornography represents a kind of a repressive, male-dominated thing against women in society." Now, you don't have to agree with that. I'm not asking for you to specifically agree with that, but if your partner thinks that way, right? It's important to know that. And then, so if you start consuming pornography, yeah, she's probably gonna be a bit pissed about it, and that doesn't even cover the other aspects to it. Some women might say, "Yeah, I'm okay with it. I don't care," because, maybe she does it too. But the reality is, like, when it comes down to it, when she sees that you're engaged in pornography on a regular basis, she starts saying, "Oh, shit. Why does he keep doing that? I'm here, and, like, I could use a little love right now. Why is he spending so much time on the damn computer jerking off to other women?" And, all of a sudden the resentments start building, right? And where the resentments weren't there before, but now it starts surfacing because the reality of what that represented becomes clear and present in her mind. Um, and that happens a lot. That happens so much. So, you might start off from a position where it wasn't a big deal to now it's a big deal. And now that it's a big deal, you can't just ignore it. Things have changed and you can't ignore that. And so you have to bite the bullet and say, yeah, you know what? I'll stop doing it. Now there's probably a bunch of guys out there right now saying, why should I stop doing it? And that's a completely separate conversation. But the reality of it is that, you know, you have an orgasm, right? You have an orgasm, and because you were jerking off to some porn. Are you going to be motivated to take care of your partner now? I'm being honest about it, man. You just literally had sex with yourself. Are you going to be motivated to go please your partner? Because no, you just got done. You're on to something else, man. Maybe you're watching a game, or maybe you're going out to play some golf or whatever. You're done and you've moved on, and that moment of time of horniness could have represented some bonding between you and your significant other. And I Look, that's just one example, but those things start to really add up. And then the woman in your life, if you happen to be a heterosexual man, the woman in your life um, starts to feel unappreciated. Doesn't matter if you give her flowers or go in and tell her you love her and stuff like that. It's they have a perception, and as you would have the same perception, right? If your woman was not paying any attention to you, um, they have a perception, and it's a justified perception. So you have to, being a good supporting partner and not being codependent, that's a completely separate conversation. But being a good supporting partner in a relationship, you set assertive boundaries, but those boundaries start and end with you and your internal monologue and how you treat yourself. Once you've put that boundary in place, in other words, you don't use other people as feeling good about yourself and defining your own self-worth, right? You don't do that. But being a loving, kind person, you also recognize how your actions could affect your family and your loved ones, and you have to recognize it. That has to be subconscious inside of you. So you're recognizing that your behaviors can impact the psychological well-being of others. It's that simple. We're at 9:30, and I said I probably ended here early today because I got a lot of shit to do. So I gave lots of opportunity. No one on chat today. It's a holiday. I will let it go. Anyway, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you all are those who are listening have been able to get something out of this. And I want you to stay on that road to recovery. Have a good holiday.